calling the meeting to order. And so the bill, an act to exempt Maine from daylight savings time. And I believe that, yes,
I believe we were going to combine all three public hearings
okay,
so people could testify
all right, let
in
me
all of them.
correct
So,
that.
Yeah, thank you.
So we're going to hear this afternoon LD 983, LD 989, and LD 1047. And I believe that Senator Bennett is going to be joining us by Zoom to present these bills. And while we're waiting for Senator Bennett, were you here for the introductions of the committee, sir?
Yes.
Okay, just want to make sure that you. And no, I was on Zoom and phone. My name is Holly Stover. I represent House District 48, including the towns of Boothbay, Boothbay Harbor, Southport, Edgecombe, Westport Island, and South Bristol. Welcome. Nice to meet you. Welcome, Senator Bennett.
Thank you very much. It's great to be with you today.
Are there others?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. Do you want
We've
me
had
to-
a request from the committee to introduce ourselves because we have some people who will be also coming in by Zoom.
Very good.
So we'll do that quickly, starting to my right.
Good afternoon. I'm Kimberly Pomelo from Standish. I represent 85.
Good afternoon, Jeff Adams, District 144, Acton, Lebanon.
Good afternoon, Randy Greenwood, House District 56, Litchfield, Monmouth, my hometown of Wales, in both Androscoggin and Kennebec counties.
Senator Tim Nangle, I'm the chair, Senate Chair, SD 26.
Good afternoon. My name is Lynn Copeland. I'm proud to represent House District 130, which is Saco. Thank you.
My name is Walter Reisman. I represent District 83, which is Bridgeton, Harrison, and Denmark.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Decker Dalak. I represent House District 120, which is part of South Portland.
Thank you. And at this point, we'll turn it over to you, Senator Bennett.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon, Senator Nangle, Representative Stover, honorable members of the Joint Standing Committee on State and Local Government. I am State Senator Richard Bennett of Oxford. I have the honor of serving 14 towns in Western Maine in the state Senate across Androscoggin, Cumberland, and Oxford counties. I'm pleased to sponsor both LD 989, a resolve directing the University of Maine system to study the potential effects of the states adopting Atlantic Standard Time, and LD 1047, an act to adopt Eastern Daylight Time year-round, contingent on federal approval. I am overwhelmed by the increasing numbers of people I hear each year who ask, why do we bother to change our clocks for 4 months of the year? Like these folks, I find this practice is anachronistic and lacking in common sense. The ultimate answer is that one we warned our children about using. Everyone else does it. But that's beginning to change as other states, including those in our region, in our time zone, are beginning to exercise skepticism too, and are considering this issue afresh. There's already evidence that changing the clocks twice a year results in some bad effects. Scientific studies have shown not only disruption to sleep schedules, the loss of work productivity, but actually also increases in traffic accidents, depression, and even cardiovascular disease. In prior legislatures, there have been efforts to pass legislation ending the practice of springing forward and falling back in Maine. However, those efforts were missing one important component. The US Department of Transportation actually requires that governmental entities seeking to change their time zone or their time following how we move forward and spring back each year, that we first study the impacts that it may have on commerce and our quality of life. A report must be generated outlining the results. Now, setting aside whether this makes sense at all, that the Secretary of the US Department of Transportation should be telling us what to do, and particularly to requiring us to have a study if we want to do this without actually saying anything about who conducts the study or, following the study results or anything like that. Notwithstanding all those potential objections, I figured we can't change that here in the Maine legislature. Federal preempts the state. So I've sponsored the legislation before you today. The resolve directs the University of Maine system to study and analyze the potential effects on the state's economy of adopting daylight savings time, which is effectively Atlantic Standard Time, and determine if that adoption will serve the convenience of commerce and meet the requirement of the U.S. Department of Transportation. Now, the University of Maine system is a tremendous resource to our state, and I'm confident they will conduct an unbiased and a very professional analysis. In fact, 2 years ago, I put a bill before the legislature to go on one time year round, and learned about this requirement by the Department of Transportation federally. And the committee actually passed the bill, and it received overwhelming support in both the House and Senate to move forward with that study. It was put on the appropriations table, and for want of $7,500, didn't pass. Now, as a member of the Appropriations Committee, if it finds its way there, I'm going to fight tenaciously to find the $7,500 to do that study. And at the same time, we learned that the University of Maine system actually has some real expertise in this area. In fact, there are a couple of tenured faculty members who have researched this subject in other jurisdictions extensively. And so I think they're well poised to do this analysis and report. As the resolve is currently written, the University of Maine system is required to fund the study through private donations. However, I know this is a concern of theirs, and as I mentioned, I will, with the committee's support on this, I will work through the Appropriations Committee or through other matters very actively among all interested parties, to find this funding, which in the great scheme is pretty small. Now, should the federal government take action independently on this issue, as we've heard various reports that they might, I think the US Senate last year passed a resolution to go on one time zone, stop the springing forward and falling back, but that no action ensued in the House. So it's possible that they will take action and allow, permit the year-round observation of Eastern Daylight Time. I believe that Maine should adopt it. This is where the other bill, LD 1047, comes in, which is an act. And under current Maine law, the state can only adopt it if it is allowed under federal law, and all the states in the Eastern Time Zone, the District of Columbia, observe Eastern Daylight Time. That's our current law in Maine. So I believe that we should remove the provision of law requiring Maine to wait on the other states. After all, Maine's motto is "Dare to go, I lead." And I think that once Maine leads on this, all the other jurisdictions will follow. That's happy to be before you today. I'd be very thrilled to answer any questions that you may have.
Are there questions for Senator Bennett?
Thank you, Senator. So the question I have is, LD 989 is to study the effects of the state adopting Atlantic Standard Time.
Right.
Well, similar, LD 1047 is an act to adopt Eastern Daylight Time year round. In other words, not changing the clocks, correct?
Correct. And
Okay.
Atlantic Standard Time and Eastern Daylight Time is the same thing.
Okay. But wouldn't LD 989, wouldn't we want, would it be, and this might be something for the work session, but would we want UMaine to study the effects of adopting Atlantic Standard Time as well as adopting Eastern Daylight year round? Study both of those, even though
Yeah.
there may be the Atlantic Standard might be the same thing, but does that make sense to you?
Thank you for the question. It certainly does. Bills are what they are, coming out of the revisor's office, and I didn't want to wordsmith the title of the bill too much. And there is a lot of confusion here because Atlantic Standard Time is effectively Eastern Daylight Time, so it's the same thing. But I like to think of it more as staying on Eastern Daylight Time, which we're now on 8 months of the year. That's what we're on. The other proposal that Senator Baldacci has brought forward would also end the springing forward and falling back, but he would have us stay, I believe, on Eastern Standard Time. I honestly, I'm not particularly fussed one way or the other. I think it makes sense to stay on the one that we're on for most of the year. But your question suggests, well, maybe we're getting ahead of ourselves a little bit. And I subscribe to your view, if that's for your suggestion, that I think it would make sense for the committee perhaps to hold over one or both of Senator Baldacci's and my acts for next year, pass the study bill this year, get the study done before the next regular session of the legislature after next January, and then take up the question then. I think that would be a sensible thing. And I also think that we can also learn that other states are actively involved with this conversation, and periodically there are public hearings and actions in New Hampshire and Connecticut, Massachusetts, all about doing similar moves. And so we could learn about those in the meantime as well.
Yeah, what I would like us to do, and I hope that I just want that, would you be amenable to amending 989, which is directing the university to study the potential effects of the state adopting Atlantic Standard Time, as well as adopting Eastern Daylight Time year round
In the study.
in the study? Meaning
Yes, I would. I think the real question though is to make it simpler and just get rid of the idea of Atlantic Standard Time. Just think about it as Eastern Daylight Time and Eastern Standard Time.
Okay.
Those are the two alternatives really before us, one of which equates to Atlantic Time. So it's kind of confusing to people because Mainers know about Eastern Daylight Time, they know about Eastern Standard Time. So I would suggest, first of all, yes, 100% support your idea, Senator, that we would go in that direction and study the whole question of the commercial effects of us doing either one of those alternatives.
Okay, thank you.
Representative Greenwood.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Senator Bennett, I had a quick question. Are you going to be formally presenting 983 as well on behalf of Senator Baldacci? Just as a formality, or are you not presenting that as well?
He has not asked me to do that. I did have conversations with him about our alternative approaches, and I think we're both more interested in going to one consistent time than we are to, and which it might be, and would really want the entire legislature, obviously, and the people of Maine to weigh in on this. So, but to answer your question, no, I don't have, I haven't been requested to do so. So I presume that he would have been here to do that.
Other questions for Senator Bennett? Okay. Any further discussion or questions for the work session?
Well,
If there's none.
we're gonna
Oh, see who else is here to testify.
take them all
Yes, I'm sorry.
individually, but
I think we would have to take them individually just because they're prepared individually.
Yeah, they're
And we do have someone here to testify. So
I have to go for support.
you do. Okay. Well, please come on down. Thank you.
thank you.
Senator, you're welcome to stay with us, but if you have other things you need to do.
I'm intensely interested. Thank you very much, Representative Stover. I'm intensely interested in hearing the rest of the hearing.
Great. Thank you.
I have not been, Senator Nangle, Representative Stover, my distinguished colleagues on the State and Local Government Committee. I'm here today to present. I've not been asked to, but as a procedural thing to keep the bill alive, I'm here to present LD 983 for the committee's consideration.
Okay. Do you want to read this to us?
This is 10:47.
Oh, okay, sorry.
Right. Right. Yes, I'll be getting to
Oh,
that one next, but 983, just as a formality, so it's been officially presented to the committee.
Okay,
Okay, great.
And that was an act to exempt Maine from daylight savings time.
okay. Thank you. And then
And then 10:47.
1047.
Two sheets to write on. Good afternoon, Senator Nangle, Chair Stover, my distinguished colleagues on the State and Local Government Committee. I'm Representative Randall Greenwood. I've been asked to read testimony in support of LD 1047, an act to adopt Eastern Daylight Time year-round contingent on federal approval. And I'm reading this on behalf of Representative Billy Bob Fockingham, and he's here to testify in favor of LD 1047. Many of us dread the changing of the time in the spring and fall for different reasons, but one thing that seems to be consistent is not many people like it. As we have evolved over time, the reasoning for the earlier daylight hours over the winter have become outdated. The changing of the clocks is antiquated, and the effects on people often get overlooked. The effect that daylight savings time has on our mental health is one of my main concerns. Seasonal depression wears on us more than we think. Beginning in the fall, we move forward the winter solstice. The days get much shorter. With lack of outside time, we tend to feel depressed because of the lack of daylight. As of late, mental health has been a focal point of everything. It is important that we continue to help the mental health of our citizens as a priority. According to the National Institute of Health, sleep disruptions during the spring transition of daylight savings time caused the suicide rate to increase by 6.25%. In addition, the death rate from suicide and substance abuse combined increased to 6.59% right after the change. Nearly every poll on this subject shows that a large majority of Americans want to end daylight savings time. According to the Associated Press poll conducted in October of 2019, 71% of people wanted to keep their clocks steadily all year, where only 28% of the people want to continue springing forward and falling back. The time to do this is now, not forward, not backward, but now. Thank you. And Representative Fockingham will be available for the work session.
Thank you. And you also had additional testimony to read today, no? Are there others wishing to testify in favor of LD 983, 989, or 1047? Seeing none. Is there anyone who wishes to testify against any of these three bills? Finally, welcome.
I was planning on saying good morning to everybody, but and I'm glad I didn't get the 2-hour parking spot. So I'm not quite sure, since I seem to be addressing all three at the same time. And since Senator Bennett did a pretty good job of talking about being open to amending his bill to change the name from Atlantic Standard Time. I have no idea in Canada whether they jump ahead or not. My name is Tim Moore, and I'm the president and CEO of the Maine Association of Broadcasters, which represents our member radio and TV stations throughout the state of Maine. I want to thank Senator Nangle and Representative Stover and all the members of the committee for the opportunity. I do appreciate it. Before the Maine legislature, 3 separate bills regarding time zones, all of which in our view are completely contradictory to any of the other 2, at least in the way that they're proposed, and any one of which in our view would profoundly and negatively impact the broadcasting industry in Maine, and by extension be harmful to our viewers and listeners, people of Maine, your constituents, and also to Maine businesses and commerce in general, with what would result in conflicting time zones in adjacent states. It's appropriate for any approach of any lawmaker to observe a problem and then seek to rectify or remedy that problem. But in the language of the bills, and again, some of that's been mitigated by what Senator Bennett said in his opening introduction, it doesn't seem to be a coherent rationale as to why these bills are being introduced in the first place. So we're left to speculate on exactly what issues or problems the legislation seeks to address. More curious is how it's possible for 3 sponsors and their co-sponsors to come up with 3 separate bills that again have drastically different outcomes. Again, taking the definition of Atlantic Standard Time as one of the bills in 1047, I believe. So in short, from our viewpoint, each of these bills appears to be a solution in search of a problem. Now, this hearing started at 9 o'clock. If LD 983 had been in effect, we would have started at 9 o'clock, but it would have been 10 o'clock along the rest of the East Coast. If LD 989 results in a study that prompts a bill to change Maine to Atlantic time as the law of the state, we would have been underway at 9 o'clock, but again, 10 o'clock, or maybe 9 a.m. in New York, New Hampshire, Massachusetts, and other states, depending on federal changes and the time of year. And lastly, if LD 1047 were enacted, we would have started at 9 o'clock unless this hearing were held in the fall, in which would have been 9 o'clock here and then 8 o'clock across the rest of the East Coast. Don't understand that. U.S. Senate a couple of weeks ago did pass legislation to make daylight saving time permanent. So whether you oppose or support this legislation, at least everybody in their existing time zone is uniform or consistent. And to broadcasters, the distinction's clear and simple, and the goal, in our view, has to be this: Maine cannot be an outlier to the rest of the East Coast, period. If Maine enacts any law to adopt a time zone that is out of step with the rest of the U.S., Eastern U.S., the effects on the broadcasting industry in Maine will be drastically affected. TV stations, Maine consumers rely on network programming, and primetime TV, as you know, is between 8 p.m. and 11 p.m. If the Atlantic time zone is made mandatory in Maine, primetime TV won't start until 9 p.m. Late local news, well, that'll be midnight. Red Sox games, Patriots games, Bruins, Celtics, Monday Night Football, the Oscars, any award show, name any live event, all will be an hour later. As President and General Manager David Abel of WMTW TV and WPXT TV states in his testimony, which is electronically submitted, he wasn't able to be here today, the networks do not have a dedicated Atlantic time zone feed. Network promos that communicate the times for programming, which are passed through to the affiliates, would all be wrong by an hour. Do valuable resources or tax dollars need to be spent to discern an impact that is obvious? If Maine is exempt from daylight saving time under the other bill, everything will be an hour earlier. And while TV stations could delay broadcast in some instances, except for, again, the live events, which we can't control, then that represents a hardship on the industry and a real inconvenience at best to the public. If daylight saving time is made year-round, as Senator Bennett had alluded to and what he appears to support, that's no issue from us, and it's a moot point if the federal legislation passes. But if not, then twice a year, Maine's population would have to adjust to a TV schedule that is in sync with the rest of the country for part of the year. And then when the nation reverts back to standard time, then the effect will be the same as if Maine adopted at the Atlantic time zone. Being adjacent to New Hampshire and in close proximity to Massachusetts, where media markets overlap and many Maine residents commute to these states for work, the confusion and disruption of their lives would be profound, and we believe completely unnecessary, as there would be 2 different hours we'd be dealing with people crossing the state border. So the prudent course of action for us would be to kill all of these bills, table them, whatever, and see what the federal government decides. The bottom line is simply Maine broadcasting and Maine people cannot be out of step with Eastern time zone. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Moore. Are there questions for Mr. Moore? I appreciate your patience today.
It's been fun. I learned about birds flying into windows,
Electric vehicles,
propane,
propane cars.
and I'm not kidding. It was all very educational. So I'm going to sign in here. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Moore. Will you be available for the work session?
I believe so.
Great.
Thank you.
We'll sign in.
I believe we have another person coming in against, who would like to testify against this bill.
I do have a question. So the Senate passed it, the US Senate passed removing daylight savings time.
Making daylight saving time permanent nationwide.
I want to say that in order to clear things, make things clearer, the Senate voted to no longer change clocks, change the times on our clocks twice a year.
Correct, but to leave it at daylight time.
Yeah.
So, and a lot of these bills we're talking about, you know, operating with other states and other state legislatures, and no offense, but that, you know, that's the legislative equivalent of herding cats, right? It's like if we move in a certain direction and the other states don't adopt it, Massachusetts and New Hampshire, for instance, you know, the TV stations, those media markets do overlap and they get into it would cause enormous confusion. And I use television as the barometer, as the baseline, but it includes radio too. Any kind of syndicated programming, which is a lot of what, you know, radio stations are running too. If there's not a dedicated feed that would address the Atlantic time zone. Now, Senator Bennett made an allusion, and again, changing just the language of the title of the bill, I think will go a long way to eliminating a lot of that confusion, because if it's daylight saving time that we're talking about and it's uniform across the Eastern United States, there won't be a problem with that, because New York feeding that network programming is still going to will be taking that live feed. You know, when we were talking about Atlantic Standard Time, does that mean that the clocks still change, but then we move another hour out of step? It would be horrendous. And I think a lot of the motivation for these bills has been to make life easier for Mainers. And the ideas of you know, lessening depression and all the other kind of biological reasons to be consistent, you know, have a place, and those are relevant, I think.
Do you know where that stands, that legislation that the Senate just passed? Do you know where that stands in the House?
I don't.
Okay.
I think it was like 3 weeks ago that the Senate did their
Okay.
thing. So
Yeah, I just didn't know if you had an idea.
Yeah.
Great.
Consistency is really that. I mean, that's our position is
Right.
let's be consistent. Let's not be, I know that dear ago I lead, but let's not get too ahead of it so that we lead and nobody follows, because that could happen.
Okay. Thank you very much.
All right.
Thank you, Mr. Moore.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Yes, hello.
Can you
Am I
hear us?
on?
Can you hear us okay?
I can hear you. Can you hear me well?
Yes, thank you. Please
Fantastic.
go ahead. Please go
Thank
ahead.
you. Thank you very much. Honorable Chair and committee members, thank you for having me here. My name is Jay Pea. Last name is spelled P-E-A. I'm the president of the nonprofit Save Standard Time. We're a 501c4. We work with many other groups, the American Academy of Sleep Medicine, the American Medical Association, and others. I'm here to ask for a yes vote on 983, which is for permanent Eastern Standard Time exemption from daylight saving time. And I'm urging a no vote on the other two bills, 989, the study bill, and 1047, permanent daylight time. The reasons for this are standard time is the real time, the natural time, the time that is defined by where the sun is positioned in the sky. Daylight saving time is a trick where you turn your clock forward so you can leave work early, which is what makes it attractive, but it makes you have to get up an hour early in the morning and every day afterward, which is what makes it harmful. Behind me, there are pictures of what permanent daylight time would do to your winter mornings. It would make it darker. I don't think any constituents are asking to have their alarm clock set an hour early all winter. I don't think they're asking to go to work or school in the dark on the icy roads. And in fact, when this has been tried in the past, it has been a spectacular failure. In 1974, it actually cost children's lives. It disrupted businesses. There was a huge outpouring to have it stopped, and it was stopped, thankfully. But we went back to switching clocks, which is the wrong solution. We really should be on permanent standard time, which in Maine is Eastern Standard Time. You are closer to the meridian, the 75th degree of longitude that is defined by Eastern Time. You're far away from the one for Atlantic Time. That one's off in Newfoundland, I think 500 or 600 miles away. So you really should be on Eastern Standard Time. I would also, if you're concerned about this bill 983 putting you out of sync with neighbors, you could easily add a contingency clause saying we'll do this if the neighboring state of New Hampshire does the same. As far as the study bills, I would recommend that you add a study of Eastern Standard Time. As it's set up, it's only set to study Eastern Daylight Time or Atlantic Standard Time. Why is Eastern Standard Time left out of the mix? And there really are actually hundreds of studies already in existence showing that permanent daylight time would be harmful to health and safety and education and productivity, whereas permanent standard time, Eastern Standard Time, would be beneficial. This is not just my opinion, but the opinion of the American Medical Association, the American Academy of Neurology, the National Safety Council, the National PTA, writers from Bloomberg, Cato, Daily Wire. There is broad support across multiple industries, across the political spectrum, to stop this retrial of permanent daylight time and actually instead to go to permanent standard time. And permanent standard time is also federally pre-approved, whereas permanent daylight time or changing your time zone is not. And so that is how Arizona, Hawaii, and all 5 US territories avoid the clock change. Most nations on Earth are also on permanent standard time. More states than ever before are considering permanent standard time, including Massachusetts, Connecticut, and Vermont, and many others across the country. I want to thank you again for having me here. I'd be glad to answer any questions you might have. Oh, one more thing. It was mentioned about mental health. And again, morning light is most important for health, physical and mental health. The human body needs to see the sun in the morning to wake up and feel good and to feel happy. And if you have permanent daylight time, you're sending people to work or school in the dark, and it hurts depression. It increases depression. So again, thank you for having me here. I'd be glad to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. P. Questions?
Can you just repeat that last 2 lines that you said about mental health and which time zone, in your opinion, is the best for mental health?
Absolutely. Thank you for that question. Mental health is most benefited by morning light. This is why when persons have depression, they may be prescribed a light box, and which is a very bright light, and they turn it on in the morning to try to wake up the brain and feel like the simulation of sunrise. The body needs morning light for physical and mental health, for our neurology, our metabolism, our heart health. All of these things need morning light, and that's what standard time does for you, not daylight saving time. So that would be support for 983 in opposition to 989 and 1047.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Representative Copeland?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And thank you, Mr. P, for being here and talking with us. I assume you're from San Francisco, California, if the internet is on target there?
No, I'm actually from Iowa, and I live currently in Arizona.
Okay. So on the West Coast, they have all those beautiful award shows. So he brought it up. So so if we wanted so if we all go to standard time, first of all, I would get out of the office at 5 o'clock and it would be dark out, which is less than pleasant. But so then the sun does move, so it's not as if it all stays the same. So when you're having the red carpets roll out, I mean, it just, I don't, can you talk about that, please?
Yes, and forgive me, I don't actually watch much television myself, but
Well, anything live is,
yes, no, I appreciate live broadcasts such as sports, certainly. And as far as leaving work in the dark, winter is always going to be dark. That's just unavoidable. If you had daylight time in the winter, and I'm looking at one of my charts here. So right now it gets dark when you leave work at 5 in November, in December, in January. And that's the way it is. Now, if you were to move to permanent daylight time, the sun would be setting at 5 o'clock instead of 4 o'clock. So it would still, you wouldn't have much usable light after work if you were on daylight time, but you'd be going to work in the dark. The sun would not be rising until 8 or 8:30 in the morning through those months of November, December, and January. And I don't think constituents, again, are asking to set their alarm clocks an hour early, go to work on those dark, icy roads, get less sleep. And in fact, when this has been tried, it has cost children's lives. If we want daylight in the morning and the evening, then I would suggest letting employees have more flexible hours if they want to choose to go to work in the dark, but don't force them to do that. And it's against health, as has been said by the American Medical Association, American Academy of Neurology, and dozens of others.
thank you.
Additional questions? Senator Nangle.
Mr. P, thank you for being here. So I guess I'm trying to wrap my head around this. What is it exactly that you advocate for? In your opinion, what's the route that the state should take as far as saving daylight time, standard time, savings time, money market time, whatever?
Yes, thank you for that question. So there's currently the status quo of changing clocks, and the best solution, as per all of the history behind this and the data behind this, is to move to permanent Eastern Standard Time. The worst solution is to move to permanent Eastern Daylight Time. We want standard time as much as possible throughout the year, and that's what 983 would do. The 1047 would move us backward, would put us into the dangerous situation of having more daylight saving. And the term daylight saving was invented to try to sell this idea of forcing people to get up out of bed early. If you were asking people to get up early, they would say no. But when you call it daylight saving time, it puts a positive spin on it. But it doesn't save any daylight. It's just depriving people of sleep and forcing them to go to work in the dark. If there is nervousness about going it alone, going to permanent standard time without your neighboring states, then you could add a contingency clause saying this shall be done when corresponding equivalent legislation is passed in our neighboring state of New Hampshire. And one more point, that is how the law, the legislation that is currently before Vermont and Massachusetts is written, and in Connecticut too. Those three states have bills to move to permanent Eastern Standard Time if their neighboring states do the same.
Okay. So I'm not sure if you are aware, but earlier when Senator Bennett was done testifying, I suggested an amendment that to LD 989, that we study the effects of adopting Atlantic Standard Time and studying the effects of going to Eastern Standard Time. So that study would take into account both of those options. Were you aware that that discussion was held?
Thank you for the question. My recollection was a suggestion to add Eastern Daylight Time to the study, and the author noted that Eastern Daylight Time is the same as Atlantic Standard Time. If there was a
Okay.
suggestion to add Eastern Standard Time, I didn't hear that, and I apologize, but I would certainly support that addition. Yes,
Okay.
please, the study
Right.
should include Eastern Standard Time.
Okay, I'm sorry, I may have gotten my terms confused, but I do have written on my notes, amend to include Eastern Standard Time. So I think that's what 989 does. And I think the idea would be to get this study done, and then we can further consider 983 and 1047. Did you hear that as well?
So again, the position of my organization would be support for 983 as it's currently written, and opposition to 989, but we would drop our opposition if indeed it were amended to include Eastern Standard Time in the study.
Okay. Okay.
And then no matter what, we oppose 1047.
Okay, all right, that makes things much clearer for me. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. May I make a further comment about the federal law?
Sure.
It was earlier mentioned about the recent action in the U.S. Senate. The Sunshine Protection Act from Florida Senator Marco Rubio has been introduced for the past 4 years, and it has failed for the past 4 years. Last year, it's always been ignored by the committees, not been brought forward for hearing, but last year it was brought forward. And it was done by a voice consent vote that was not announced. And then it stalled on the House side. That bill has expired. That has been reintroduced now for the 5th time, but it has to start all over again. So its current status is not passed in either chamber of the Congress.
Okay. All right. What? Sure.
Representative Reisman
Oh.
had his hand up, and then.
Sorry.
Thank you for your testimony. I'm wondering for our workshops, if you could provide us copies of the studies that you referred to in your testimony?
I'd be glad to provide any documentation. Yes, sir.
Representative Greenwood.
You stole my question, Representative Reisman. He referenced some studies and I just wanted to know the citations. And if you could just provide them to us for the work session, that'd be great.
Additional questions for Mr. P? If not, we hope you'll join us for the work session if you're available.
I'd be interested in that. Yes, thank you.
Any additional questions? Seeing none, thank you for joining us today, and we'll see you at the work session.
Thank you for having me.
Representative Reisman has one more.
Mm.
Oh, no more for you, but thank you very much. You're welcome to stay with us.
Thank you.
Thank you. I've been on this committee the whole time I've been a legislator, and we've been down this road before. And I believe I'm going to ask our legal analyst to chime in if she can now or at some point, that there is already a law in statute for the state of Maine that says if the eastern seaboard agrees on a time, then Maine will also agree to that time and will adopt it. Can we? Okay, so I mean, I think what we're looking at here is pretty much already been taken care of. So I'm a little concerned that we're spinning our wheels here for no particularly good reason. And I'm just going to leave it at that we may be able to save ourselves some time here.
Additional information anyone would like for the work session on these 3 bills?
Well, again, I'm thinking that we did have extensive conversation about whether the University of Maine should study this or not study it. And I understand that there was a study done, but it just didn't get funded. So probably we need to revisit what that study looks like, so we understand that.
Thank you. And we were given this salmon piece of paper, which was actually passed by the 130th, but not funded. So I don't think the study was actually completed because there was no funding for it. Right, the study wasn't done, but the study was passed to be done, but there was no funding. But it would, so Representative Reisman, would it be good to perhaps have whoever, if I wasn't there and you were, to have whoever committed to that study from the university present? Is that, or just an update?
I believe Senator Bennett had organized that with the university, and it was contingent upon outside funding. And he was unsuccessful in getting outside funding, so the study did not occur. But I think he indicated that it would still be available to be done for that same cost, but that would be for the work session.
Thank you. Any additional information that we need for the work session? Zzz. That was plural.
Has that been scheduled yet? The work session?
No. Seeing none. I have to get the right numbers here. So close the hearings for LD unless we have anyone else, either for nor against. We do not. We'll close the hearings for LD 983, 989, and 1047.